Mollie here. Welcome to our channel. First, I will give a recap of this week's episode. Then, the old man and I will talk about it. There are bookmarks to help with navigation, but I highly recommend listening to both parts. So, let's dive in. Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 3, Episode 6, The Salat Who Ate Its Tail. The episode begins with Lieutenant James Kirk giving the first officer's personal log. Stardate? What is the stardate? The implication was supposed to be that NuKirk was so bored, all the stardates were running into each other. And it certainly wasn't that the makers of this crap didn't want to commit to an actual date because they didn't want old school fans who care about such things to pick apart their new timeline of NuKirk's life. Anyway, the Farragut is conducting a planetary survey of Helicon Gamma. NuKirk is irritated because he thinks they should go down to the planet and do an actual survey, but his Vulcan lady captain thinks they should do it from orbit. She wants to do everything by the book, but NuKirk thinks the book would be more interesting if he got to write it. The planet was geologically unstable, which kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It had continents, but I guess the whole planet was unstable. What was this, like Futurama, where they mined all the fuel out of the planet, leaving only a shell about to collapse? This just seemed like a juvenile plot device, but I will get to that later. Lady Vulcan Captain tells NuKirk that boots on the ground are an unwarranted risk, and he says risk is why we're here, isn't it? And while NuKirk is pleading his case, an unknown force strikes the planet, and as the planet is blowing up, NuKirk hesitates. He stands there staring at the planet. He finally snaps out of it, and only gets out the words, "All hands, brace for," before the impact hits the ship and a whole bunch of people are hurt, including Lady Vulcan Captain, leaving NuKirk in charge of what's left of the ship and the crew. Something is interfering with their distress signal, and NuKirk says, "It's coming from that," and we go to the opening credits. When we return to the story, we see the Enterprise has shown up, and Chapel, Uhura, Spock, Scotty, and La'an beam aboard the Farragut. They discover there are barely enough people left to crew the ship. They go to their respective departments with orders to head to the bridge as soon as they can, because all comms are down. NuKirk is in the middle of getting a talkback from the helmswoman when Spock, La'an, and Uhura get to the bridge. NuKirk and La'an address each other by their first names, and NuSpock looks from La'an to NuKirk and back to La'an. It's obvious the familiarity was not lost on NuSpock. NuKirk says it was a miracle their distress call made it through, and we as the audience know that it did because it had to, so they could have a certain group of characters interacting with each other, almost like this was supposed to be a setup for a spin-off show. So Uhura gets Pike on the horn, and NuKirk tells him they were on a planetary survey when all hell broke loose. NuKirk tells Pike that a ship aimed a focused gravitational beam at the planet. In the background, La'an says, "Destroyer of Worlds." Captain Lady Vulcan had ordered an evacuation, so the Enterprise is going to retrieve the escape pods, and Pike wants to beam the rest of the Farragut's crew to the Enterprise. NuKirk agrees this is the right call. NuSpock gives La'an what little info they have on the mystery ship, and she immediately beams back to the Enterprise, and Spock watches her until she's gone. Suddenly, the comms go down, because the mystery ship has returned. NuKirk looks out the window and sees the Enterprise fighting back in vain, right up until a flying tentacled Castle Grayskull swallows it whole. NuKirk wants to fire on monkey-faced Castle Grayskull, but Spock points out that the Enterprise's weapons were ineffective, and firing would do no good, and it could destabilize the Farragut. NuKirk is impotent and has no choice but to let Castle Grayskull fly away with the Enterprise in its belly. NuKirk contacts sickbay, because he needs Captain Lady Vulcan to tell him what to do. But we have finally found something Nurse Chapel conveniently can't do, and that's an emergency craniectomy. So Captain Lady Vulcan had been sent to the Enterprise, and can't tell NuKirk what to do. NuSpock tells NuKirk he is now captain of the Farragut, and they await his orders. Over on the Enterprise, they're wrapped up in tentacles, in the belly of Castle Grayskull. They only have basic life support, and comms aren't working. So Pike sent a runner to engineering but the runner didn't come back, and Pike assumes they've been boarded. La'an asks if Pike has heard of the Destroyer of Worlds, and multiple people on the bridge tell of a similar story in many cultures. If you've seen Firefly, you'll know them as Reavers. So, they've been captured by Reavers. Pike, being the only man on the bridge, tells the women to get everything ready so they can make a run for it. Back on the Farragut, NuKirk is giving an acting captain's log, and remarks on how it feels strange to say that, and how under better circumstances it would be thrilling. He's interrupted by NuSpock and company, and they brief him on what they've ascertained about flying Castle Grayskull. NuKirk tells them to figure out where Castle Grayskull is going, so they can get there first. Back on the Enterprise, Pike and La'an run into Pelia in a corridor. She informs them that there is an umbilical that's been run into engineering that's stealing their power and fuel. It will have to be disconnected so they can escape. Back on the Farragut, NuKirk finds new Scotty in a new Jeffries tube and explains to him that the scavengers were after Eldentium from the planet they blew up, and Sullivan's planet is nearby and rich in Eldentium, and is home to over 100 million pre-warp people, so the Farragut needs to get there before Castle Grayskull so they can set a trap for the scavengers. New Scotty tries to explain that the plasma manifolds are shot, and if NuKirk pushes the ship too hard and it fails, that's our fault and not theirs. I assume theirs was referring to the Castle Grayskull. This was a stupid argument, because aren't 100 million lives worth the risk? I don't like New Scotty. He's actually my candidate for worst written character in this episode. NuKirk tells New Scotty, it's a risk, but I'm betting on us, and to prepare for maximum warp. Back on the Enterprise, Ortegas tells Una there's not enough power to steer the ship. They need comms to activate the thrusters by hand. This is when Pelia walks in and tells them this may be the first time she's glad to have lived through the 1980s. Meanwhile, Pike, La'an, and yet another female crew member exchange fire with the intruders. An extra female crew member is shot and killed. Back on the Farragut, they're cruising at near Warp 7 and manage to overtake Castle Grayskull before the plasma manifolds blow out, leaving them in the path of Castle Grayskull. And NuKirk had finally sat in the captain's chair after staring at it like he'd never sat in it before. Which I'm sure he must have at some point, because there must have been times when Captain Lady Vulcan hadn't been on the bridge, and NuKirk had been in charge. New Scotty throws a tantrum because they pushed the ship too hard, and now they're dead in the water. The new Enterprise crew are acting like this is a democracy, and at least NuSpock says it isn't their decision to make. NuKirk tells them he doesn't need their chattering voices, he needs to clear his head, and runs off like a little So then Nurse Chapel starts making plans to relieve him of duty, as being mentally unfit. This little scene felt very mutinous. New Uhura says NuKirk may still be working on his command style, and maybe they can help him find it. She's seen him in a crisis before, when he didn't have the pressures of being captain, and he saw something in her that she hadn't seen in herself, and it saved her life. And she just thinks he needs to be reminded that the same thing is in him. NuSpock volunteers to go talk to him. Back on the Enterprise, Pelia is in her quarters, which are bigger than our whole apartment, and she gets the lights on by using a battery and jumper cables. She has stuff everywhere, and goes to a trunk and pulls out multiple telephones, old school ones like you plug in the wall, and an old Atari with joysticks. The phones become the new comms, and the thrusters will be operated by joystick. Ortegas looks at one of the phones and asks if it's a personal massager. On the Farragut, NuSpock goes to talk to NuKirk, and NuKirk laments that he doesn't know what Captain Lady Vulcan's next move would be. NuSpock tells NuKirk that to keep the crew waiting any longer would be not good. NuKirk tells NuSpock, from the moment he joined the Academy, he was determined to sit in the captain's chair, faster than anyone before him, because he thought he knew better. He thought he was better, blah 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 blah. He always thinks he should be the one giving the orders, and earlier he told Captain Lady Vulcan to send a landing party, and thank God she didn't listen, because they would have been on the planet when it exploded. NuSpock tells him Good leaders know when to listen and when not to. This was such crap because NuKirk couldn't have known Castle Grayskull was about to blow up the planet, and Captain Lady Vulcan's judgment to not go had nothing to do with the reasons why the planet actually exploded. So this was just over-emotional garbage writing for emotional effect. Just bad butchery of established characters. Then NuKirk blames himself for not listening to New Scotty's warning about the engines, yada yada yada. NuSpock points out that NuKirk is having a crisis of confidence, but he still has to lead. Then NuKirk tells about how his mom was fond of an expression, the dog who caught the car, and NuSpock tells him on Vulcan they have a similar expression, the sellout who ate its tail. Then NuSpock tells NuKirk he has a leg up on a quadrupedal beast, that being his human intuition, and it's guided them this far, and they are still there, and he recommends NuKirk keep following it. Because Spock telling someone to follow their intuition isn't bizarre at all. So NuKirk goes back to the bridge, and he tells the new Trek crew that rousing speeches aren't his forte, and he has no intention of giving up rescuing the Enterprise. The group finds Castle Grayskull's weakness. It never has enough resources, and they can use the Scavenger's bottomless greed against them. NuKirk tells New Scotty to fill the plasma manifolds with Eldentium. They don't have Eldentium on board, so they're going to make it look like Eldentium decay coming from the Eldentium-powered engines. And when the Scavengers come for the Eldentium, the Farragut will make them regret it. NuKirk tells NuSpock he feels funny being called Captain while Captain Lady Vulcan is still alive, and NuSpock promises to demote him at the earliest opportunity. Back on the Enterprise, Pike and La'an are fighting the intruders, and Pelia hooks up the phones, and they have comms. The thrusters are ready, with telephones and joysticks. M'Benga manning one of them, and for the life of me, I can't understand why he isn't with the injured in sickbay. I guess Captain Lady Vulcan's craniectomy went fast and smooth, and there's no one more qualified than the doctor to manually operate the thrusters. So Castle Grayskull arrives at the Farragut and extends its Cthulhu-like tentacles, kind of like that thing from Season 1 of Picard. Because apparently eyes aren't Secret Hideout's only obsession. Anyway, tentacles are extending. New Uhura is at the helm. She dives toward Castle Grayskull's mouth, but then swerves over its back. The tentacles follow. They detach their nacelles and blow off the ends of the tentacles, disabling the flying castle. New Uhura contacts the Enterprise and tells Ortegas Castle Grayskull is temporarily disabled, and now is the Enterprise's chance to escape. La'an and Pike create a backup in the umbilical, giving Castle Grayskull indigestion, like when Pinocchio lit a fire inside the whale to get him to cough him up, and Castle Grayskull retracts the umbilical, giving the Enterprise the ability to manually activate thrusters using telephones and joysticks to escape. Once the Enterprise is clear, the Farragut fires into Castle Grayskull's mouth, and the whole ship explodes from within. NuKirk has NuSpock scan the debris for life signs, and NuSpock reports that there are 7,000 life signs, and they are dwindling quickly. NuKirk asks if they can beam survivors aboard. New Scotty replies, "Not even if we wanted to." And Nurse Chapel says there's too much debris to get a transporter lock. On the Enterprise, Captain Pike is in the corridor, looking down at the body of one of the intruders. He removes the Scavenger's mask and reveals what NuSpock has just shown to NuKirk on the Farragut. The Scavengers are human. As the remains of Castle Grayskull fall away, the original ship's hull is exposed, and we see a battered American flag painted on the side. In their historical database, Uhura found information about the original ship. In the mid-21st century, before first contact, a group of scientists believed the Earth's environmental crisis was too severe to recover from. So they built a ship. They hoped it would carry humanity to civilizations in other worlds. But the ship disappeared. Of course, Pelia remembers when it was launched. It was before warp drive, and they'd barely put out the fires of the Third World War. One of the few nations left standing, sifted through the ashes of their space program, scoured the world for a crew, basically the best and most optimistic. The 7,000 who just died were descendants of the original crew. So what went wrong? How did they become Reavers? Later on, Pike informs NuKirk that Dr. M'Benga says that Captain Lady Vulcan will make a full recovery. The Enterprise will tow the Farragut back to space dock. He tells NuKirk that NuKirk made the right call, and NuKirk saved hundreds of lives on the Farragut and the Enterprise. But there's no mention of the 100 million people on the planet. NuKirk points out that the estimated number of human casualties on Castle Grayskull was 7,000. Pike tells NuKirk the big decisions seem so simple when someone else has to live with the consequences, but the choices made in the captain's chair are his to make, and the consequences are his to live with. Some decisions he will regret for the rest of his life, but he still has to make them. NuKirk says, "They were human beings. Why does that make it so much worse?" Pike tells him having empathy for your adversary is part of the job. NuKirk says, "But I didn't. I didn't think of them as people, at all, until it was too late." And Pike tells NuKirk, well, maybe that's the lesson. Empathy isn't conditional. It's either given or it isn't. They clearly saw us and either didn't recognize us or didn't care. NuKirk says the last 200 years turned the scavengers into monsters, and asks Pike if that's what they would become in the same circumstances. Pike likes to believe that they wouldn't because of how NuKirk is currently feeling, and the next time NuKirk is in the chair, he'll remember they are often not that different from their enemy, and that knowledge will continue to guide NuKirk. Pike stands up, says goodnight, Captain Kirk, and leaves. The end. This was really bad. Aside from the absolutely ridiculous design of the flying Castle Grayskull with big tentacles, the character assassination that took place on a number of TOS characters was, I would say, on par with that absurd parody episode that was apparently supposed to be funny, but it was actually just mean-spirited.
When one looks at the episode from a surface level, one can just kind of write it off as they tried to tell kind of an action-y, disaster-y story, and whether it worked for you or not, at least they tried. I don't think they did try here, because I agree with you. What they did specifically to James Kirk, I got a problem with. That conversation that Pike and Ace Ventura had at the very end of the episode, if you just go and find that one conversation, that's actually not too bad until you realize that it doesn't really connect with the rest of the episode. Because I was confused on some of the points. For instance, is Ace Ventura a xenophobe? Because it sure seemed like he was. Those lives only meant more when they were human? Which is odd, because a scene or two before that, when the nacelles blew off the tentacles of Castle Grayskull, it was Ace Ventura that was asking Scotty, can we get these people off if we beam them off? And he wasn't worried about whether they were alien or humans or what. And then when Scotty oddly said, well, even if we wanted to, well, Kirk just asked you if you wanted to. That bothered me, that piece of dialogue.
Oh, he asked if he could, not whether or not he wanted to.
And so when Scotty came back with that answer and said, we can't do it, Ace Ventura was upset about that. So at that point, I'm like, nobody knew these people were human yet on Castle Grayskull. So it was showing me that this was the beginning of Kirk seeing that the galaxy is made of many different races. But then at the end, when Pike was talking to Ace Ventura, that conversation seemed to go in the other direction, where Ace Ventura learned the lesson of, well, whether they're people or not, those lives should just matter. Which is a Star Trek thing, but the way this ending speech was, it made me feel like Ace Ventura is some sort of xenophobe. So it's a good thing he wasn't captaining the Enterprise when Hemmer was on board, because I can only imagine how he would have been treated if this is how this James Kirk is going to behave. And at least in that conversation with Ace Ventura, Pike seemed mentor-y because there was nobody else around knocking him down, so he was able to actually share some wisdom. Much like I said last week, it's scenes like this that bother me because you can see what this show could be if the writing was better. The actors are fine. It's just the writing that they're given is such garbage. And yeah, Scotty throughout this whole thing
was a jerk.
Yeah, it was a lesser character assassination than what they did to James Kirk, but it was still a character assassination. And it bothered me. And I am so tired of the Pelia character. I hope she goes on an away mission and just gets lost somewhere into space and done with it. Because I'm tempted to call her Discount Guinan here soon. Because she serves no purpose other than to be annoying.
You should call her Discount Guinan. That's what she is. She is the Guinan character.
Because the second half of this episode, if we remember the rumors that are floating around, as Kurtzman is panicking and trying to get as much stuff out the door as he can, they've been peddling this Star Trek Year One idea that apparently Akiva Goldsman would be heading up if they approve it. And that's supposed to cover when James Kirk takes over the Enterprise. Basically, the year one of him taking over. And that's what this episode was when they had Uhura and Spock and Scotty and even Chapel, I guess, all on this Farragut ship. And Mollie and I were talking, this was Muppet Babies. This was like watching a lesser version of a group of people that you like running around teaching childlike philosophy stories. The difference is that Muppet Babies actually was decent storytelling for children. This was not. This was just such a clear, hey, we need to film a pilot so that we can sell Year One, and that's what they did here. So you can sniff that this is their attempt at selling this Year One to Paramount and soon Skydance. And it wasn't very good. I do not want to see any more of this crew. Ace Ventura is not Captain Kirk. I'm sorry, he's not.
So this is the same Captain Kirk who had to go through the Kobayashi Maru in Starfleet Academy. So he was never in a position where he
would be cowardly overwhelmed and then just run in the other room because it was too much for him.
Apparently a simulation wasn't enough. I doubt that. Yeah, you wouldn't get out of Starfleet Academy behaving like that. Plus, to me, this seems to take place, even though they didn't give us a star date, just based on what the timeline has looked like so far. This seems to me that this would have taken place after the events referenced in the TOS episode Obsession. So he already was in a situation where his captain died because he hesitated, or at least he thought that's what happened. Turns out that's not what happened at all, but he carried that with him for 11 years into his own command.
Well, I mean, he did hesitate according to the account, but it wouldn't have made any difference. You found out in Obsession that had he have fired those weapons, it wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever.
His captain still would have died.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he finds out 11 years after the fact that it wasn't his indecision that killed his captain. It would have happened anyway.
And I guess defenders of this would say, right, that was building on those events talked about in Obsession. Really? How did he ascend to be a captain if he was this much of a basket case? He never would have ascended to be a captain of a starship if he was carrying that much around. Obsession, the whole point I got from that episode was that when they re-encountered that creature, that it unearthed all this stuff that he had buried, a decade earlier. It wasn't sitting around in his active memory. It was like just in the back, archived until it was pulled out.
Well, I think that incident 11 years prior had made him hyper-vigilant. It had made him super decisive because he didn't want that to happen again. And in this episode, they pretended like that never happened. Like that wasn't part of his past. that he was carrying that with him. This was... I almost used the R word there. This was stupid. This offended me so deeply.
And another thing they did that bothered me against the James T. Kirk character is in TOS, Kirk used to give speeches that sometimes would change the direction of a story. So, one, they made the little joke here about I'm not one that's known to make these big speeches or whatever, which I guess you could have kind of a tongue-in-cheek going, yeah, but you'll turn into that.
Well, yeah, because I think this was meant to be his very first one, because I think it was Nurse Chapel then said, well, you're doing great so far, or something like that. This is supposed to be like Proto-Kirk when his very first rousing speech.
And the second thing that they did here is one of his most famous speeches was from the episode of TOS, Return to Tomorrow, where he sat in the conference room talking to Spock, McCoy, and a couple of other people. I think Scotty and somebody else was there. Anyway, the story had to do with whether they were going to agree to have these energy creatures temporarily inhabit their bodies while they built them robot bodies. And Kirk gave a speech about risk is their mission. That's what they do. Risk is their job. That's what they do. And that was one of the better speeches from TOS. And Kirk had a lot of good speeches in TOS. And then they kind of just were playing a sarcastic joke, I guess, when they were mentioning Kirk. He several times talked about risk. And you know it was a callback to that speech from Return to Tomorrow, one of his better speeches.
Well, I think these writers were given a list of attributes and risky behavior. I think that was on the list. And so they just keep using it over and over and over again because it's one of the few bullet points that they have as to who this character is. Or, and this is my favorite topic, probably some people are getting sick of it, like this is actually written by AI that doesn't understand what it actually means to risk.
Because what they were making Kirk out to be is not somebody who took on risk. He was irresponsible.
Yeah.
As you pointed out in the recap, they were trying to, narratively speaking, blame Kirk that if they would have went with his idea of landing on that planet, that would have been him being irresponsible. Even though in narrative you had no way of knowing that Castle Grayskull was anywhere around. That was just plot made it happen because you wanted to show that James Kirk is irresponsible. And if you would have listened to him, many people would have died.
It reminded me of what happened with Commodore Deckard. Like, his people were down on the planet. How the hell was he supposed to know that that planet killer was a planet killer?
Yeah, it's funny, too, because this episode sniffed quite a bit of the Doomsday Machine from TOS, which is where Commodore Deckard was in.
And for me, that's one of the most memorable episodes of TOS. I love that episode. The actor who played Commodore Deckard was amazing in that. And the story itself was heart-wrenching because he lost his whole crew and he was just devastated by that. And this is what mental right. And they think that it's so deep, and it's not. It's just this superficial crap. And I would just question the emotional level of the people who write like this.
And maybe I missed this, because after a while, my brain was shutting down watching this. But I assume that this Enterprise has about the same crew complement as the TOS one. So there should be over 400 people on this ship. Where were they? Did they mention they were trapped in some decks or something? Because it seemed like there were like 8 people on the Enterprise.
Well, they were all supposed to go to the inner part of the ship to stay away from hull areas where it was going to get cold. But
they were under attack. That should have been, go to the armory, pick up weapons, defend your ship.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. Like, Dr. M'Benga being responsible for activating thrusters manually using a joystick. I don't even know what to say at that, other than that was stupid.
Well, especially since, given what was happening on that ship, you would have expected multiple casualties happening as they were being breached by an enemy. So Dr. M'Benga should have been in sickbay handling the wounded. But he wasn't. In fact, when they were on the Farragut and the captain of that ship needed to have some sort of procedure done on her brain, and Nurse Chapel admitted that, well, geez, that's one thing I can't do, which was funny, because I was expecting her to, like, pull a paper clip out of a drawer and say, yeah, I could do it with this, because, you know, she can do anything and everything because she's the greatest ever. At least they said in narrative that she wasn't qualified as a nurse, and it was stated that, you know, somebody else would have to do the procedure, and I assume that would be Dr. Mbenga. But then they transported her back, so I guess she had that delicate surgery happening while Castle Grayskull with the tentacles pulled the Enterprise inside and ate it up.
Well, only if somebody else was doing it, because Dr. Mbenga was off doing other stuff. He was in Pelia's quarters when she was digging around for phones, and then he was in the hallway operating a joystick for the thrusters, so I don't know who did the craniectomy. I didn't know that they had other doctors on the ship at this point, because we never see any. I would have thought it would have had to have been him. Although why Nurse Chapel couldn't do that, I don't know.
Well, she shouldn't. She's a nurse. She shouldn't be doing surgery.
Oh, yeah, but now she does away missions with...
Well, she's an archaeology expert, and...
Yeah.
As I said, I expect her to pull out a paperclip and do a MacGyver. Yeah, I can do this, no problem. I don't even need any disinfectant. I'll just dip this in some sort of, you know, water puddles on the ground, and I'll take care of it. No worries.
Yeah, so she doesn't have skills when it's convenient to the plot that she doesn't have them.
This whole episode, on the surface, seemed like it was a hit and miss, but at least they tried to tell some sort of action episode. But when you dig into this, this was not a good attempt. This was a character assassination of James T. Kirk. This was a character assassination of Montgomery Scott. And then this was a backdoor pilot for Star Trek Year One. That's what this was. And it should be looked as that, because I have nothing positive story-wise to say about this episode. When Pike and Ace Ventura were talking, if you just grab that off YouTube in isolation, that's a decent conversation. But when you actually look at it with the rest of the story, it was nonsensical. This whole episode was nonsensical. This is on par with what last week was, in my opinion. Could I grab stuff from different movies and episodes this was borrowed from? Yeah, I could. It wasn't as blatant as Indiana Jones, but yeah, the Doomsday Machine was one of them. Return to Tomorrow was another one of those. And yeah, you go back to A Space Adventure Hour, which was that episode where they had that meta episode in the holodeck where they were making fun of James Kirk for the entire episode. This was a continuation of this. These people who make this series, not only do they hate Spock, they hate James T. Kirk. And people are misinterpreting what they're doing with these characters and going, no, they actually think these are great characters. Look how they're presenting them. It's like, right, look how they're presenting them. It's the same way I used to get into these online interesting discussions with people about Picard Season 3. Yeah, those are the same actors in that case, but look what they're doing. Look at Picard getting thrown off the bridge. Look at Riker doing something similar to what Ace Ventura did here when the going got tough. He went back to his quarters or wherever it was, and he was like doing a letter to Deanna when there was like, his ship was in major trouble. And yeah, I want to rewatch Picard Season 3 because it's got that great stuff in there, those character assassinations. Maybe Worf can stab more people in the back, because that was his standard operating procedure now. He would just stab people in the back. There was no facing them with honor. He would just stab them in the back. Big deal. That's Worf now.
Or, Dr. Crusher wanting to kill prisoners, execute prisoners.
Yeah, her and Picard. Have we reached this point? Yeah, I guess so. We're just going to have to kill her. Even having that debate, I mean, but people defend Season 3 of Picard. They really do. And getting them to understand, do you understand what those characters were being made to say, the words coming out of their mouth, how they were being portrayed? You understand they were being smeared and dragged through the mud. You understand that, right?
Well, maybe if people went back and rewatched that third season, now that the member berries effect have possibly worn off. You know, the joy of seeing the group back together again. Maybe they'd pay attention to the story and see what we saw, that the story was actually abhorrent.
The story was ripping off Ronald D. Moore's Battlestar Galactica, and the character assassinations were ridiculously bad.
Yes.
And what I'm pointing out is that's what they're doing here with Ace Ventura playing James T. Kirk.
Yes.
They are character assassinating him in a similar type way. Except this time it's played by a different actor, but it's the same character he's supposed to be, just earlier in his timeline. And there's a difference between being inexperienced and just being an idiot. And this person that Ace Ventura played, he was not fit to be a leader. The story just made him be that. And that's not who James Kirk was at all. Yeah, he might be inexperienced when he's younger, but James Kirk's not going to run in the back room because he's being overwhelmed. And then I laughed when Nurse Chapel was, after he left the bridge and Nurse Chapel was trying to connive a way to relieve him of duty. Like, they haven't done enough with that character, Nurse Chapel, to smear her, and they're doing it even more.
Those NuKirk abominations, the ones that they had on the Farragut, that I have a feeling they're going to be trying to build a new show around, they're a Mean Girls club. That's what it is. It's a cliquey, nasty little club, and it seems like Nurse Chapel is the queen bee.
Can you imagine if year one takes off and they cast a Leonard McCoy, what that character is going to be? What the stereotype of that character is going to be?
Well, he's probably going to be a racist against Spock.
Well, among other things, he'll probably just yell all the time, not understanding that McCoy from TOS was basically the conscience of the show. So he was the humanity of the show. They'll just have some guy yelling and, yeah, making fun of Spock left and right, just to be mean-spirited. Not playful like he used to do in TOS, but actually mean-spirited. I dread to think what this year one's going to cast for McCoy. And so all I can say to people is take a good look at how they portray James Kirk in this episode. And if you're blinded by what happened in Season 3 of Picard, you probably won't be able to see what they did to James Kirk here. And I don't know any advice to give you. Just, I guess, move along. So, for me, this was a bad episode. I was bored. The telephone stuff wasn't cute. It was stupid. Pelia is beyond annoying at this point. Didn't at some point she talked about being a groupie for the Grateful Dead or something?
Yes.
And again, if this is targeting Gen Z, the Gen Z doesn't care about the Grateful Dead.
They don't know who they are. No, that was for the Gen Xers and the Boomers, who apparently they think are still watching. Some are, I guess. But I just found this to be offensive. Yeah, all the telephones, they can pull out all the telephones they want and the roller skates and the Ataris, but it's not going to change the fact that these characters are so immature, I can't stand watching them.
And Pike is useless. Even in that quarter fight, he got his butt kicked. Pike is useless. What does Pike do? What does he do well? Let me ask that question. Other than he has big poofy hair, what does he do well?
Well, think about it. What men did we see on this episode?
Spock, Scotty, and Ace Ventura. Oh, and Pike.
And Pike. And there was one more. Well, M'Benga was there.
Yeah.
And then there's one more. We saw one more male face on this episode.
Oh, the enemy.
Yeah, the scavenger. Everybody else was female.
Well, I've thought that was weird for a while. At first, I was like, okay, it just happens to be there's a bunch of female people on the bridge, or there's a bunch of female people in sickbay. But then when you start paying attention to things, this isn't just you just happen to catch a group that just happen to have a bunch of females in a group. It's like, no. There's some initiative going on here, and I don't quite get it.
Because that other person that went with La'an and Pike to go check into the scavengers who had boarded the Enterprise, It was a woman. She got killed pretty much immediately. I don't even remember what her name was. Didn't matter. Red shirt.
I didn't even remember the captain of the Farragut. You called her female Vulcan, because that's essentially all that mattered, is that she was female and she was a Vulcan. Her name was irrelevant.
Yeah. And we didn't really get to see anything about her other than she was cautious. That was it. And then we spent the rest of the time with NuKirk whining that he needed her to make his decisions for him.
When he brought up his mom, when Ace Ventura brought his mom up, it turned out it wasn't as bad as I thought they were going to go with that, the dog catching the car finally. But as soon as I heard him say, well, my mom, and I gritted my teeth. I'm like, what are they going to do now? How are they further going to emasculate this person? Luckily, it didn't go as bad as it could have, but it still was pretty bad.
It was still comparing his ambition to get into the captain's chair to a dog chasing cars. Think about that. Because when I first saw the title of the episode, the Salat Who Ate Its Tail, I thought it might be like some sort of Ouroboros situation. You know, like if anybody's familiar with Red Dwarf, you know, this snake eating its own tail. You know, basically an infinity circle. I thought we were going to get something a little bit more cerebral. Then this is Kirk, and he's a dog, and he's been chasing the captain's chair, which is the car. And when he gets it, it's like the dog that's been chasing the car, and he has no idea what to do with it. All this time, all he's been doing was pining for that captain's chair, with no thought as to what it actually meant to be captain or in leadership. Which I find to be just... I call bullshit on that. What was he doing that whole time in Starfleet Academy? I mean, I took leadership classes in college, and I would have been far more prepared than this moron.
Now, at the end of the episode, he did actually come up with a plan that worked, but how we got there smeared the character.
Well, after he went and hid and cried like a little bitch.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and Spock had to go get him.
Just like Riker did in Season 3 of Picard, but people seem to think that's great that he did that.
They think that's character development. Being a whiny little indecisive bitch apparently is character development. Being a coward apparently is character development. I
think you're right. I think they would argue, no, we're trying to show how he became. We love the James Kirk character.
I don't think they do, but I still think that this is... I think they think this is good character development. I don't think they understand that he should have come out of Starfleet Academy with proper leadership skills, which he clearly does not have. I don't think that they understand the first thing about leadership. I don't think they understand the first thing about empathy. I think these people, they need to stop writing until they grow up. Because this was written by a bunch of people who with the mentality of a fifth grader.
Well, that assumes they're writing at all.
Which again comes back to, did AI write this for them? Which wouldn't surprise me any, because again, so many aspects of this appear to be stolen from other places. So, whatever.
And I guess on that note, we should probably get going.
Alright, so, whatever. We'll see you in the next episode.
Take care.